Welcome back from the newsroom. Now let's continue our conversation on the morning edition. The proposed 2026 federal budget has triggered widespread public debate following reports that about 8.05 billion naira has been allocated for the construction and renovation of churches and mosques across the country. Supporters of the allocation argue that faith-based organizations have long complemented government's efforts by providing education, healthcare, humanitarian assistance, and community development. And they believe supporting religious infrastructure is consistent with Nigeria's social and cultural realities.
Well, actually, beyond the figures, the debate touches on a much broader issue of governance and national priorities. In a country where public resources are limited and development needs are enormous, how should government determine where taxpayers' money goes? Should public funds be used to support religious institutions that provide social services to communities? Or should those resources be channeled towards sectors such as healthcare, education, security, and critical infrastructure that directly affect every citizen? These are the questions that continue to, divide public opinion. And to actually help us examine these issues that we're taking a look at, we're joined by Salaudeen Hashim, Program Director at Clean Foundation. Mr. Hashim, thank you so much for joining us this morning on our program, The Morning Edition.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Let's delve straight into this matter that we have at hand. This matter is actually generating a lot of debate, and rightly so too. At a time when many Nigerians are actually struggling with the rising cost of living, do you think allocating 8.05 billion naira to the construction and renovation of churches and mosques reflects the country's most urgent priorities?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is fundamentally a mismatch between our current reality and the proposal of government. And this also continues to expand one of the concerns that citizens have raised around government matching needs with budgetary priorities. For instance, it raises a number of questions. One, the question around governance. Two, it raises questions that borders around constitutionality. Three, on our economy. Four, on social cohesion. So there are a lot of questions that this particular proposal has raised. And this also does not in any way interlock with our fiscal reality. Currently, we know how much of domestic debt that government is owing. We know how much of foreign debt that we are currently servicing. We know the current situation at borders around helping the country to be rescued from a already challenged situation. And of course, trying to make this proposal doesn't sit well. Section 10 of the Constitution is very clear that Nigeria is a secular state, and at no point should government adopt any religion as one, whether in terms of financing. Already we are arguing that the pilgrimage support that even some states oftentimes provide, and I think that also happens at the national level, supporting pilgrimage, and at some point it was stopped. But again, Nicodemously, that particular activity has been reintroduced, where government will support some for pilgrimage and others for some sort of religious tourism. This in any way does not sit or is alien to our constitution. So adopting and practicing and continue to advance this sort of practices in any way is violating the extant provisions in the constitution. It is very clear that any sort of violation of the constitution is considered a rape and, of course, undermining the legal framework and the classical norm of the country.
Well, I hear you on the enumerations that you made, which is quite apt too. But there are some people who actually support this move of government. And they say that allocation that are made to churches and mosques do much more than actually provide places of worship, because the churches, the mosques, they do more than provide places of worship. Many of them actually run schools, some of them run hospitals, some run orphanages and even humanitarian programs. So does this actually make government funding of religious infrastructure easier to justify because they actually do some things, they provide what you probably might call CSR?
No, already government has extended its hands of fellowship to this enterprise, if you like me, I call it that way, by already exempting them from taxes. So that for me alone is sufficient, because to be very honest, the luxury and the level of opulence that you find some of these religious centers display suggests very clearly that they do not need in any way any sort of extension of government support, because a number of them have all of the income without necessarily having any capital to also run that particular business. So generally what they have is profit, and government also has been able to demonstrate some level of support by ensuring that they get that exemption. So I do not think this is in any way having any, it doesn't sit well with citizens when already there are deficits in housing. And then, of course, a number of us have seen how a number of citizens have also been displaced very recently as a result of either flood or some sort of conflict. All they rely on international support to come and provide housing units to some of these displaced individuals. So if you have excesses to that extent, so how can you not reprioritize and channel it, for instance, into supplementing for food for children in school, or otherwise provide housing units for Nigerians, or otherwise provide adequate transportation where people can move from point A to point B. If you check the current reality of the fiscal budget of an average household, you realize that food, transport, and housing and shelter are taking the chunk in their entire budget, and of course what comes into them. So what are those subsidiary and subsidies that we can provide to be able to safeguard and of course mitigate their spending plan? So I think again it is a disconnect between reality and government's own proposal, and it is always very clear that every budget should be needs based. So what was the needs assessment? What was that particular process that decision went through? So the budget office, for instance, sit and decide and say this is what Nigerians might probably need, or that. So how did they get to that decision making? Because budgetary allocation is not a casual process. It is meant to go through a thorough procedure before a decision is reached. So I think it is very important for government to actually show citizens.
Well, I hear you on all of these that you have mentioned, but some people will say, is it not too late in the game? Are we just not blowing hot air when we are criticizing?
Forward.
Well, very quickly, I was just saying, some people will say, are we just not blowing hot air in all of these that we are saying? Because we have an agency that is in charge of pilgrims. They call pilgrims welfare, but there was one for the Muslims and there was one for Christians. They actually help to, help those who are going on pilgrimages to carry out whatever they want to do. And you even find state governments, some state governments, and even some parts of the federal government actually aiding some people in this process. So if we are doing that already, what is this one that's just been added, getting religious bodies to have some things installed in their places? Would you agree with that?
And that is the reason why we need to really speak out around it. And then, of course, I know in the past we have consistently pushed the narrative about Nigeria being a secular state. All of those religious investment and budgetary provisions should be completely removed and eliminated because it does not sit well. Because the fact is that if we continue to push in that direction, Nigeria is a plural society where you have religions of both faiths. As a matter of fact, even the African traditional worshippers are already agitating that why also are they being neglected, because they are also a recognized worship centers, and each time government is trying to provide some subsidies, it is only for the both faith, and they have neglected the African traditional worshippers. And then, of course, you recall recently in Anambra how that the governor has very interestingly and strategically decided to say that, look, most of these traditional worshippers and even fake pastors are already helping to negatively influence the society. We know that religious centers has also contributed to dogmatism in our society. So, to be very honest, there is nothing absolutely positive, if you ask me, that most of these centers have added to citizens, other than making them to continue remain very complacent. But what we are saying is that religion and worship are personal. People who want to worship should do so at their own personal level, and then, of course, approach any worship center that is most suitable or convenient to them. But anytime government intervenes or steps in, opportunities are there that there will be lopsidedness. Because even if you check the provisions that we talk about, a particular faith may have gotten above the threshold against the other faith. That in itself is a recipe for conflict. So why, therefore, are we investing in an area that is very intrinsic? And maybe we should also know Nigeria is considered to be very religious, whatever that means. But I am only saying that if we consider Nigeria to be very, why then do we have to invest in this? And mind you, that some reports have also suggested that in Nigeria you have the richest religious leaders in the world. But you don't have the richest religious centers. Mark those difference. You have the richest religious leaders in the world, but not the richest religious or worship centers. So that tells you very clearly that most of these centers we talk about have become personal empires to people, where people have created wealth and they have used that to advance a number of their personal interests and design. So my point is that what therefore is government's interest in trying to do this? If you say in that budget line that those monies are meant for the religious centers that government has built, perhaps at the villa or in various government house, we can actually now begin to ask a different question. And the different question we should ask is, why do you have to build religious centers in state infrastructure? Which we think in itself does not sit well with citizens. So fundamentally, either way you look at this, it is actually a wrong priority. It is a wrong decision. It is not what directly affects the lives of Nigerians. And I think government must review that particular budget line and reappropriate it into areas that has direct impact. In this country today, except for people who live in cosmopolitan cities like in Abuja or in Lagos that have access to potable waters, every Nigerian today that wants water are drilling boreholes. There is no public infrastructure that supplies water to average Nigeria, not potable water. And yet every year we continue to budget for water resources. So what exactly are we budgeting for? We budget for failure. And you are now introducing another line, and this is actually to test the water. It's only a matter of time before it also expands into something that is hydra-headed. So it is better to curb it now, because again, it has no direct value on the lives of average Nigerians.
You know, when we have stories like this come to the fore, we also have to look at how these aligns with globally accepted standards. In the UK, for instance, the Church of England receives a significant amount of support, from the government. In parts of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the rest of them, it is even the government that builds the mosque, pays the imams, and takes care of a large amount of how they run their operations. In Israel, for instance, significant amount of support for some of those Jewish and Judaic institutions. So I mean, in terms of how these aligns with global standards, is it not ideal that we're just doing something which is obtainable in other nations of the world?
Context differs. Most of these guys that you have referenced, I would rather give them my own money as well, because I know too well that they invest a whole lot in education, creating. I know how many career basketballers, how many career footballers. Most of these guys have actually developed and they have actually harnessed those talents. I know how many IDPs and shelters they have built for people who are displaced. As a matter of fact, I have traveled most of these climes. And sometimes people who are visitors in those countries, for instance, in UK, there's a particular church in UK that every single day there is a food court where they kept for people who are visitors who cannot afford food. During COVID, churches were going around in the UK to provide food to people in their various homes at their doorsteps, and not just food, balanced, heavily packed with every form of household needs that you could talk about. These guys have been able to understand that it is about CSR, it is about service to the people, it is about ensuring that quality of lives and nutrition for children and education for all is achieved. In Africa, we actually transformed religion into an enterprise. And that is the reason why context has actually shifted and it has made a lot of difference. During COVID, how many churches went house to house to provide food to most of their members? I doubt if we can count any. I know I have read one or two that actually supported government in terms of equipment. But my point is not supporting government to that very large extent, but how many churches provided food to their members, going from their houses to make all of those provisions available. I think it is very important that we're able to do some of those simple analyses. So in those climes, most of these provisions are made because the people are the priority. But here, those priorities are shifted and they are actually truncated to serve only those who lead the process and not the people in any way.
I mean, I hear you on all of those points, and I mean, the context that you've also brought into it. So perhaps now, should the focus not be on accountability? Because there seems to be some level of accountability with some of these climbs when these monies and this support are given out, and then we see these religious centers actually using it for the people. So instead of saying, oh, we shouldn't be allocating money to religious centers, to churches, to mosques, should the focus now be on allocating this money and making sure that those who, the monies have been given to are held accountable?
We already have enough sector to hold accountable, and we have not even managed to hold them properly to account. And then, of course, for me, adding a sector that does not in any way have any direct value to those what accountability mechanism do we want to begin to establish for those monitoring? Look, monitoring has indicators. To be able to do monitoring that would add value, you must be able to establish indicators. And then, of course, you know too well, in this part of the world, in the name of the Lord, everything goes without necessary, because the fact is that the more you try to introduce any accountability mechanism, the more somebody feels offended that you are trying to spite his faith. And that is actually very intrinsic. It is very sensitive. We live in a world today where anything can be classified as blasphemy. We have seen recent happenings and a lot of issues. So on both sides, we know too well how religion in itself has divided us as a country. Why go into that particular space to start making all of these investments? In those climes that we have talked about, you necessarily don't need anybody to watch over you. You know too well that even Nigerians that have actually opened religious and worship centers outside the shores of this country, they have to be taken over by this government, because they know too well that these guys have not been accountable. We knew how Red Cross had been handed over some worship centers in the UK, in the US, because the Nigerians who actually floated them had thought that the same kind of practice where they were coming from were going to prevail. So you realize very clearly that it is not about it's about us. It is about what we think. It is about us believing that once we flash a banner that suggests that we are anointed, that gives us the liberty and the passport. And a particular passage says, "Touch not my anointed, and do my prophet no harm." So people always believe that why therefore should you question a man of God? And of course, there's a faith that also think that you don't query a leader or religious leader. Now, if you have those statutory religious provisions that says this shouldn't be the case, my question is, what accountability infrastructure do you therefore want to deploy? So I think very clearly that this is not in any way sitting well with this is not what Nigerians need. As a matter of fact, Nigerians are getting to the point where they have actually they have used religion to continue to balkanize people's faith, balkanize people's thoughts, balkanize the economy. I saw recently a pastor who was accosted, and I don't want to use the pastor, a religious leader who was accosted, and the faith was that he prayed, and the wife came to donate the only car the family has to him. And the husband accosted the pastor. You must have to return this vehicle. So these are the kind of situations and circumstances. And each day we wake up, we see a lot of stories about religious leaders who have now converted people's wives into their own personal properties, and of course have introduced sodomy in some cases. These are current and regular happening, and it is unfortunate. And of course, trying to do this means that we are putting legitimacy to some of those ills that these religious leaders are propelling.
There seems to be a breakdown of trust. Finally, in 60 seconds before we let you go, what do you think government needs to do to convince the Nigerian people that whatever monies that is captured in the national budget is spent trying to improve the life of Nigerians? In 60 seconds.
Government has not even told us how they have spent electricity money properly, and yet we are paying for darkness. They have not told us how water is properly paid for. They have not told us how. So how will anybody be interested? The government should immediately resign that decision and reprioritize that budget line.
Thank you so much, Salaudeen Hashim, Program Director at the Clean Foundation, for your expert insights on the program with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, interesting perspective from Mr. Salaudeen on this very burning matter as government prepares to, well, in the words of Mr. Salaudeen, he believes this particular issue should be rescinded. The conversation extends beyond even this one allocation. He's raised a couple of other concerns as to the monies that have been allocated for electricity and some of the other important things that citizens need, what has been done about it. It's about how public resources are prioritized, how citizens measure value for money, and how governments build public confidence through transparent and accountable spending.